Hello, good day everyone. I am Giovanni Entero, and today we are going to talk about a very nice and a very important geologic features which offer a wide range of ecosystem services. And if you already watched my previous presentation, you have an idea now of what we are going to talk about today. So basically, I am pertaining to these things. As I mentioned in my previous presentation, we are going to talk about these things. These are lakes, and actually, these are from Philippines. I know you're very much familiar with these ones, especially the ones in the middle. So for now, I covered the name of each lake for you. If you want to make a hunch or make a guess about the names of these lakes, so you can pause the video. But for now, we will move to my title page. So basically today we are going to talk about lakes, particularly the prevalent issues and problems arising on that geologic feature. For we know that lakes are crucial for Earth's hydrologic system, holding significant fresh water, supporting biodiversity, and aiding local economies. However, they face serious challenges like pollution from agricultural runoff and industrial wastes, climate change effects, and invasive species, and even domestic wastes. These issues threaten water quality, aquatic life, and communities depending on lakes. Now, addressing these challenges is essential for preserving these vital ecosystems for the future. So, as I've said, these lake ecosystems offer a wide range ecosystem services, especially for the residents living near the lakes, for they rely much heavily on the lakes as their freshwater supply. So now, after talking about the prevalent issues and problems on lakes, we delve deeper into each of these lakes, the ones you've seen on my screen, and try to discuss what are also the prevalent issues in there. Now, there are lakes here that are closely monitored, but there are also lakes that we hardly or we can barely find information available online. And later you will know what those lakes are. So for now, let's proceed to my presentation outline. So we will be starting with brief introduction. So basically, I'll be talking here about the structures and dynamics of lake, particularly the horizontal zonation and vertical stratification. And next, common problems and issues. And then we are going to examine each of the lakes I presented to you earlier about the underlying issues and problems in there. And then we will be starting with Laguna de Bay and followed by Buhi, Bato, Baaw, lakes. By the way, you have to put them together because they actually belong to a one lakes system, and later you will know what name of that lake system is. And then followed by Nawan Lake, and then after that one, Lanao Lake, and last one will be my references. So for now, let's proceed to brief introduction. Okay, so this is the general structure of the lake. So for us to visualize it, try to imagine a bowl. So from the rim of the bowl, it's the shallowest part, and then gradually going deep, deep, and deeper, and until it reaches the deepest part. And then from the deepest part, it gradually going to the shallowest part again. So that's the general structure of the lake. So lakes can host a variety or diverse of organisms. For example, Nicton, as you can see on the slides, the fishes there are Nictons, and a lot more organisms and even microorganisms that actually facilitate the production and the functions of the lake. So our main point here is the horizontal zonation of the lake and the vertical stratification of the lake for us to understand the dynamics of the lake. So we will start with the horizontal zonation of the lake. So first, we have to remember these two things, the littoral zone and profundal zone. So when we say littoral zone, as you can see on the figure, it extends from the catchment area or the shallowest part of the lake up to the last part or up to the last occurrence of aquatic plants, or we call that one as macrophytes. So if we want to remember what littoral zone is, we just have to remember the quote I provided, inhabited by macrophytes. So the parts of the lake that still have a plants, those belong to the littoral zone. So now the complete opposite of littoral zone is the profundal zone, and that can be explained by vertical stratification of the lake. So when we say vertical stratification, we have to remember two things, the photic zone and the aphotic zone. So refer to the figure I provided to you. For photic zone, so we have vertical line there from the very surface of the lake up to the last occurrence of the macrophytes. We call that one as photic zone. So why? Because photic zone is light rich, meaning to say if the light reaches that region, it gives an opportunity for an organisms or plants or producers to photosynthesize and produce their own food and food for their corresponding consumers. Now, for a photic zone, that's a complete opposite of the photic zone, meaning to say, for a photic zone, there is little to no light at all. So, meaning to say, there's no photosynthesis happening in the aphotic zone. And so that corresponds also to the profundal zone. That's why in profundal zone, it is not inhabited by any macrophytes or any primary producers or plants. So that's an explanation why profundal zone is not inhabited by macrophytes. So going back to aphotic zone, it doesn't mean that there are no organisms living in there. There are still organisms living in there that are capable of producing their own food and the food for their corresponding consumer, but not through the process of photosynthesis. We call that process as chemosynthesis. So meaning to say they rely much on the oxidation of other compounds to convert the carbon-containing compounds and nutrients to organic materials or organic compounds. And I just want to add this with respect to temperature zones of the lake. We have the so-called epilimnion, thermocline, and hypolimnion. So epilimnion, just try to think about the photic zone. The extent of photic zone is actually the extent also of the epilimnion, and a little below that one is the thermocline. The thermocline is actually the point where the temperature of the lake changes rapidly or drastically changes. And below that one is the hypolimnion. That part is the coldest part, meaning to say that epilimnion is the warmest part. Now, going back to the general structure of the lake, so imagine if there are a lot of agricultural area near the catchment area of the lake, and that agricultural area has no proper sewage system or proper waste treatment. So all of the contaminants will go to the lake. And with respect to the general structure of the lake, the fate of the contaminants now will be on the deepest part of the lake. And so as the time goes by, it will accrete there and accrete and accrete and accrete. So further, not just contaminants will accrete here, but also the available nutrients coming from the catchment area to the shallowest part of the lake will also accrete in there, meaning to say the hypolimnion part is very rich in nutrients. Now, another feature of the lake is it can do turnover in the long run, meaning to say those things in the hypolimnion part will go on the top and then the epilimnion part will go to the bottom part, meaning to say the colder temperature, the colder part of the lake will be mixed to the hotter part of the lake. So if the nutrient rich part will go on top, it will give an opportunity for the other organisms to consume that one. And in a worst case, it will facilitate eutrophication and algal bloom. So expect a nuisance from that event or the bad smell. That's just a bit of information of how the lake works or how the lake functions. So we will be needing that concepts on understanding deeper how the lake's being contaminated or being polluted by other contaminants and eventually be degraded. And just to add one more, one natural process of lake is that eventually as a substance accrete on the bottom part, it gets shallower and shallower in geologic time, if not in human time scale. And then eventually the water will disappear and then the lake will become a land now. And that's where ecological succession comes in. So from lakes, it can be another terrestrial ecosystem which also offers diverse ecosystem services. So I hope you get the point about the general structure and dynamics of the lake now. So that's enough for the brief introduction. So we will be moving to our second outline, the common problems and issues. So common issues and problems in lakes are these ones. So main issues and problems, the decline in their fishery production. So commonly lakes are very abundant in fish and actually a good site for aquaculture. But due to mismanagement, maybe the fisheries production will decline eventually. And another one is the loss of biodiversity from overfishing. So this is very related to my previous presentation that the mindset of the people will tend to overfish as long as there is something to fish on. And then destruction of habitat. So it could be, for example, the increase on the number of fish pens in there because lake area is not unlimited. And then another one is pollution. Pollution can mean a lot. For example, pollution of plastics, organic contaminants, or heavy metals could be. And then introduction of exotic species. So this is common because some of the fisher folks usually use foreign species to be a biocon, but due to mismanagement or not properly managed, eventually that become an invasive species. And so the biodiversity of the lake will be affected. And another thing is multiple use conflicts. That's very obvious. And for some other issues of the lakes are these things. Contamination of inorganic matter, actually, that falls under pollution. Eutrophication, I already mentioned that one when I discussed lake turnover. Then fish kill, that can be also a result of eutrophication or other pollution. And then contamination of heavy metals, for example, domestic industrial wastes, if not properly managed, like no waste treatment or no waste sewage system. And then also agricultural runoff, very common, especially if there are a lot of agricultural area near the catchment or watershed of the lake. And then water quality, especially if there are a lot of foreign substances or contaminants going inside the lake, then the water quality will be affected. And then introduction of foreign species. I already discussed that one when I talk about invasive species. Consequent of that will be invasive species, as I've mentioned a while ago. And then also depletion of endemic species. One reason is due to invasive species because eventually invasive species can dominate the lake and so endemic species will be gone. And then last will be development or urbanization. Due to the rapid development or urbanization nearby the lake, the catchment area, or the watershed of the lake will be polluted. The lake will be directly affected, especially if the development or urbanization is mismanaged or not properly managed. For example, the waste, no waste treatment, no proper sewerage system, and eventually that will translate to problems and then that will translate to the lake. So lake will be directly affected with that. So these are the common issues and problems in the lakes, not just here in the Philippines, but also across the world. And I've read or I took this from various references. So now we are done with the common problems and issues of the lake. So we will move now to some lakes in the Philippines and we will be starting with Laguna de Bay. So I know you're very much familiar with Laguna de Bay. So this is the picture of Laguna de Bay from aerial view. And with respect to the map of the Philippines, the red dot there is actually the location of the Laguna de Bay. To be specific, so Laguna de Bay is actually the largest lake in the Philippines. And then its location is on Region 4A. And if you are going to look at it at the Philippine map, it is actually the southeast of Metro Manila. And for the lake type, it is theorized as caldera lake or tectonic lake. When we say caldera, if you're familiar with volcanism, it is actually a volcano and then erupted and then the magma chamber collapsed and then due to precipitation, it is filled up by water and then become a lake. So they believe that Laguna de Bay is like that. And actually the middle part of the Laguna de Bay between Mount Sembrano and Talim Island is the Laguna Caldera believed to have been formed by two major volcanic eruptions around 1.27 to 1.29 million years ago. And actually the evidences found in there is the presence of Mars. If you're familiar with Mars, this is also coming from an eruption of the volcano and it's actually a volcano that erupted once and due to precipitation it is filled up by water and then it becomes a lake, a small lake. So if you can see on the picture of the Laguna de Bay, there is an island in the middle and that's actually the Talim Island and it is the densely populated island in the lake. So with respect to the surface area of the Laguna de Bay, it ranges from 911 to 949 square kilometers. So imagine how big that is. And for maximum depth, it is 20 meters, but maybe this is previous years ago. Because when I've been at Laguna Lake, a lot of people saying that the maximum depth of the lake now is actually ranging from 7 to 8 meters. So that's according to them. And with respect to inflows, there are a lot of tributaries, actually 21, but the most major contributors are the Pagsanhan and Santa Cruz. Pagsanhan accounts for the 35% of the water in Laguna Lake, and Santa Cruz accounts for 15%. So imagine this much of tributaries, and for example, remember the reach to reef concept. If each tributary is polluted, then eventually it will translate to the lake. So imagine 21 contributing to the lake. So meaning to say, Laguna Lake is very prone to contamination of foreign substances or contaminants. And then with respect to outflows, it is via Napindan Channel, primarily drained to Pasig River. And actually, Pasig River is technically a tidal estuary instead of a unidirectional river. And when it comes to uses, Laguna de Bay is actually a multi-purpose resource. So from fishery, recreation, aquaculture, irrigation for agricultural lands, power generation, it is actually a source of water for the Kalayaan pumped storage, hydroelectric project in Kalayaan at Laguna also. And then also it is used in industrial effluents, reservoir for flood management, and a lot more. And before we go on to the environmental issues of this lake is actually closely monitored by several agencies, unlike the other lakes. And you will know later what those agencies are. And now for environmental issues of Laguna de Bay, it is greatly affected by development pressures, be it population growth, rapid industrialization, and resource allocation. Now, because of its importance in the development of the Laguna de Bay region, unlike the other lakes, as I've said, its water quality and general condition are closely monitored by certain agencies. Now, due to the rapid industrialization or the development nearby the lake, water quality problems are actually created by those things. That's why water quality is the main variable that some agencies are monitoring with respect to Laguna de Bay Lake. Now, as population expand on bay, it is expected that they rely heavily on lake for freshwater supply, thus water quality directly affects human populations. That's why water quality is very important to be monitored regularly from time to time. And the next is invasive species. So aquaculture is widespread but often involves non-native species. So as I've said, a lot of fisher folks use non-native species as their biocon, and if not managed properly, that will translate to invasive species and eventually dominate the lake and affect now the biodiversity of the lake. And the next is pollution. As I've said, pollution can mean a lot. So from agricultural wastes, domestic wastes, industrial and factories wastes, traces of plastics of different sizes. Actually, one of my colleagues has a study on the lake tracing the presence of microplastics in there, and they found out that the lake is heavily polluted by microplastics. So how much more with nanoplastics? The smaller plastic size than microplastics. And actually, it is not just polluted with microplastics or nanoplastics, but also mesoplastics, megaplastics, and even macroplastics. So actually, government data showed that about 60% of the estimated 8.4 million people residing nearby the lake discharge their solid and liquid wastes indirectly to the lake through its tributaries. So imagine there are 21 tributaries in the lake, and if each tributary is inhabited by a lot of residences, and then each resident discharge their waste to the tributaries, so imagine how much of the contaminants being discharged all through the lake. So just to add, actually in a recent report by Laguna Lake Development Authority and Integrated Water Resource Management, the agencies closely monitoring the Laguna de Bay, they reported that 70% of biochemical oxygen demand or BOD loadings came from households, and 90% from industries, and 11% came from land runoff or erosion. So that actually represents how much pollution coming into the lake or influx of pollutions into the lake. And just try to imagine how polluted the lake currently. And another issue is siltation. Actually, siltation is settled fine sand, soil, or mud in the waters. And then when I've been to a certain part of the lake, I really saw a clayish and a muddy water in that lake. Actually, that lake is nearby the duck farm. And I don't know if the duck farm has proper waste management or waste treatment. And then another issue is overfishing. So I already explained that one. So that's very obvious. And then infrastructures due to the rapid urbanization and development nearby the catchment area or the watershed of the lake. So like rising infrastructures that will directly affect the lake, especially if the waste are not properly treated. So among of infrastructure in the lakes are Mangahan Floodway, Laguna Lakeshore Expressway Dike, East Bay Submarine Pipeline, and Takil Water Treatment Plant projects. So that's just some of the infrastructures in there, and there are a lot more rising now. So now, as I've said, Laguna Lake is closely monitored by agencies. One main agency is the Laguna Lake Development Authority or LLDA, and it also have Clean Water Act and also integrated coastal ecosystem conservation and adaptive management. So at least there are agencies that keeps on monitoring the status of the lake. So going back to this picture, as you can see on the rightmost side, it is heavily or densely populated. So imagine if all of the wastes will be directly thrown onto the lake, and imagine how pollution it can cause to the lake. So I think that's enough for Laguna Lake or Laguna de Bay. And then we will move now to my next outline, which is Buhi, Bato, Baao, Bula lakes. And remember when I told you that they actually belong to a one lakes system, and that lake system is actually Rinconada or Bicol Lakes system, which comprises Lake Bato, Lake Baao Bula, and Lake Buhi. And a little caveat is Lake Baao Bula is actually Lake Baao alone, but some people call it Lake Bula. But if you try to search it on the internet, it's actually Lake Baao only. So now when it comes to interlake distances, the Rinconada Lakes system actually look like this one. So the most small among them is the Lake Bula, and then followed by Buhi and Lake Bato. So Lake Buhi is actually situated in between of two volcanoes, and later you will know what those volcanoes are. And for the prevalent issues and problems in these lakes, I'll be discussing those things as one later. So now let's go first to Lake Buhi. And just like Laguna de Bay, Lake Buhi is also closely monitored. So the location of Lake Buhi is actually at Buhi Camarines Sur. So it basically belongs to Bicol region. And then lake type created due to earthquake or created by Mount Asog. That's actually a theory only. And they believe that it is created in 1641 when an earthquake caused a side of Mount Asog to collapse. The resulting landslide created a natural dam that blocked the flow of the nearby streams and then eventually formed that lake. And then another theory theory that it was created by Mount Asog, which is now inactive. And then when it comes to area, it extends 18 square kilometers and maximum depth is 18.2 meters. And as I've said, it is actually situated in the valley formed by two ancient volcanoes, the Mount Iriga, also known as Mount Asog, and Mount Malinaw. And then in terms of its uses, main source of water supply for the National Power Corporation hydroelectric power plant, and also irrigation, like irrigate at least 100 square kilometer of Rinconada Lakes systems, and then fishery, of course, navigation, and then water supply. So actually today, the lake is the main source of water supply for the National Power Corporation hydroelectric plant, which is actually founded in 1952. Like it generates an average of 2.8 megawatts, and that actually powers or provide electricity or current to the nearby communities. And then, as I've said, just like Laguna de Bay, Lake Buhe has legislative and institutional measures for upgrading lake environments. And actually, the Research Institute engaged in the lake environment studies. First is Program of Environmental Science and Management, or PESAM, and another one is our very own University of the Philippines, Los Baños. And I don't know if it's done or not right now. And there's also a development plans there, like hydraulic control structure in operation since 1984. So Lake Bato looks like this, and it is actually similar, slightly similar to Lake Buhi, and located close proximity to that lake. To be specific, the location is Bato, Camarines Sur, also in Bicol region, and then the former name of this lake is Sadit Narano. And then the same as Lake Buhi, the lake type is believed or theorized to be created due to earthquake and due to Mount Asog, something like that. And in terms of surface area, it has 28.1 square kilometers and an average depth of 8 meters. This lake actually has extensive marshes and swamp forest. And when it comes to outflows, it actually drains into a tributary of the Bicol River, which enters the sea near Naga City. And actually, early settlers thrive on the lake's rich resource and use it as a primary medium of travel. And then next, for recreational and tourist spot, and then tilapia fish cage farming, and then prawn fisheries. Now, for Lake Bao Bula or Lake Bao only, this is actually the image of that lake, and it looks also pretty similar with the previous two lakes, the Lake Buhe and Lake Bato. And specifically, the location of Lake Baao is actually Baao Camarines Sur. And then lake type, the same as the previous two, believed to be created due to earthquake or created by Mount Asog. And then surface area is 1.72 square kilometers. And actually, every summer, it shrinks. So I mean to say it will be reduced further. And for average depth is only 1 meter. And for inflows, actually, it is fed by local runoff and several small rivers. Most important of it is the Tabao River, which actually flows from another lake, the Lake Buhe. That's why it is called a lakes system, because some waters coming from the other lake also flows into the other lakes. And then for the outflows, it actually drains west into the Bicol River, and its uses actually agricultural, recreational, and tourist spot only. Because as you can see, as you can observe, the surface area will be shrink every summer, and this is just 1.72 square kilometers. No, Rinconada Lake system comprising Lake Bato, Lake Buhe, and then Lake Bao actually famous since it is one of the few bodies of water that contains the sinarapan, which is actually the world's smallest commercially harvested fish. So at present, the sinarapan is threatened by extinction due to overfishing and other factors, but efforts to conserve it are ongoing also. And another thing is that sinarapan is actually endemic in that region only, Bicol region. Now, for Rinconada Lake systems issues and problems, or environmental issues and problems, the main one is deterioration of lake environments and hazards. First is enhanced siltation. However, the extent of damage is not that serious. And also eutrophication. So nuisance caused by eutrophication or bad smell. And then unusual algal bloom. Of course, as I've said earlier, due to lake turnover, the nutrients will be mixed and then it will promote eutrophication and, of course, unusual algal bloom. Especially if the lake is shallow, just like Lake Baao, so it is greatly affected by wind dynamics. So it can easily turn over. So these are the environmental issues and problems in Rinconada Lakes systems, and maybe there are still more because there are only few information available online, and I've never been to this place or these lakes. So next is the Nawan Lake. Nawan Lake is actually located in this part of the Philippine map, and its picture look like this one. So relatively clean. So specifically, Nawan Lake located at northern corner of the province of Oriental Mindoro, and then lake type volcanic region. And if you're familiar with the Philippine fault systems, there's actually a major fault located nearby the Nawan Lake, and since there is a major fault there, there's also volcano. That's why it is believed that the origin of this lake is volcanic origin. And with respect to its area, it's actually 216.55 square kilometers, so it's relatively big. And then maximum depth is 45 meters. And then its inflow is 9 tributaries. However, its outflow is one outflow only, which is the Butas River. And by the way, this is actually the fifth largest lake in the Philippines. Now, the main geofeature or geological feature of this area is the Nawan Lake National Park, or NLNP, or the protected area. It is actually declared as a national park on March 27, 1956, through the proclamation number 282 by President Ramon Magsaysay. The park has existing facilities for tourism and recreational activities, which include picnic tables and house quarters. And specifically, they cater boating, picnics, bird watching, because actually this lake is the widest breeding place for marsh birds. And also, they offer educational tour and other scientific research. Next is the lake watersheds also provide important ecosystem services to the island of Mindoro, such as water for irrigation. This is very common among lakes, and hydropower generation, wildlife habitat, flood protection, tourism, and other livelihood opportunities for nearby communities. And then, as I've mentioned, hydropower generation, livelihood source, and productive freshwater fishing site, because actually before this is actually open for fishing competition. And then, for notable issues and problems in there, since it is a protected area or a national park, so there's no actually big deal issues on the lake proper, but rather they actually concerned on the threats for deforestation and habitat degradations on the catchment or in the watershed area of the lake. So this is very actually triggered by slash and burn farming. If you're familiar with slash and burn farming, they cut the trees, and then if there are remaining ones, they burned it. And also charcoal production and illegal tree cutting, and then also residential development. Residential development or urbanization is actually a threat to these kind of geological features. And the last one is the Lanao Lake. So the Lanao Lake is located in Mindanao area, and you must be familiar of this lake because among of the lakes in the world, this is one of the 15 classified ancient lakes across the world, not just in the Philippines but across the world. So specifically, location of this lake is in the province of Lanao del Sur, somewhere in the Mindanao part, and then lake type formed by the tectonic volcanic damming of basin between the mountain range and collapse of a large volcano. Because again, if you're familiar with the fault system of the Philippines, there's actually a fault nearby that one, and it is actually close to the Cotabato Trench. So if that's the case, there are a lot of volcanoes. That's why they theorized or they believe that it is formed due to that activities or geologic activities. And then it is the largest lake in the Mindanao, the deepest and the second largest lake in the Philippines. So counted as one of the 15 ancient lakes in the world, as I've said. And then its surface area is 340 square kilometers. And then maximum depth is 122 meters. Imagine how deep that is. And then for inflows, there are four rivers or four tributaries of this lake, namely Ramain, Taraka, Gata, and Masiu. And then for the outflow, there is only one outlet, which is actually the Agus River. And then it eventually flows to Maria Cristina Falls and Tinago Falls, the famous falls in Mindanao. Now, for its uses, it has a great hydroelectric potential due to its 700-meter elevation. And actually, during 1950, Philippine National Power Corporation, or NAPOCOR, began the construction of a series of hydroelectric plants titled Agos 1 down to Agos 7, which actually generates 70% of the electricity used by the people of Mindanao. And the construction of Agos 1 effectively turned the lake into a reservoir. And another use is fishery resources. Again, that's very common to lake systems. And then tourism. This is very obvious since it belongs to the 15 ancient lakes across the world. And then for its prevalent issues and problems, first is contamination of massive algae. And then they believe that the main source of this one is poor sewage and agricultural waste management because there's also agricultural areas nearby the lake. And then another one is soil erosion from indiscriminate logging and extensive land use. Maybe, for example, development nearby the area or something like that. And then farming. And then Next is endemic species are slowly disappearing. And I don't know if there are still endemic species in there because actually there is one study from MSU IIT or Mindanao State University Iligan Institute of Technology. They conducted a study in there and then they found out that the endemic species are actually disappearing. And I don't know if up until now there are still endemic species in there. So that's actually a prevalent and an alarming issue in Lake Lanao. And aside from that, actually the main conflict in this lake is not about pollution or whatsoever, but because of the people. Actually, the lake has a cultural significance to the natives, especially for the Maranao. So they are very strict when it comes to introducing disturbances on the lake. For example, infrastructure or the development nearby the lake. They are very strict for that, and that's where conflict arise. And I guess that's it. And then last one will be my references. So these are all my references. If you wish to study or to read further about the lakes and other environmental issues and problems prevalent on a specific lake or in lake in general, you can browse these references. So I think that's pretty much it. And for now, thank you for listening. Thank you for lending me your time. Thank you for watching this video. And I hope you learned something today. And have a nice day. God bless us all. Bye bye.